In the mountains of Appalachia, there are people who were told they did not belong to any race. They were called everything from Portuguese to Turkish to alien. None of those names were true. The truth was simpler, and in some ways, more extraordinary than any myth. The Appalachian Mountains stretch from Alabama to Maine. In the hollows of eastern Tennessee, southwestern Virginia, and eastern Kentucky, a community has lived for over 200 years. They are called the Melungeon, and for centuries, no one could agree on who they were. The answer was always in the chromosomes. It just took 200 years for anyone to look. Newspapers called them a mystery race. Ethnographers called them an enigma. Neighbors called them worse. The Melungeon Heritage Project recruited over 100 volunteers, each one providing DNA and documented genealogy. Portuguese sailors, Turkish merchants, lost colonists. The theories were endless. DNA ended them all. When geneticists finally tested Melungeon descendants, the results were definitive, and they were nothing like any of the romantic theories. Families wrote desperate letters, pleading for their children to be allowed into the white school. Most were denied. The Melungeon were not lost Europeans. They were not ancient Mediterranean travelers. They were something far more American. They were a mixed-race community that formed in colonial America. And then they were erased. The word Melungeon first appears in written records in the early 1800s. Its origin is debated. The family names survive: Collins, Gibson, Mullins, Goins, names carved into headstones across Newman's Ridge. Some of these graves go back to the 1780s, the first documented generation of a community that had probably existed longer. The courts became the battleground. Melungeon families hired lawyers and produced witnesses to argue their whiteness. Some scholars derive it from the French motelange, meaning mixture. Others trace it to an Afro-Portuguese term, Melungo, meaning shipmate. The nearest town with a railroad was over 30 miles away by rough mountain track. Isolation was total. What the records agree on is that the Melungeon were classified as neither white nor black nor Native American. They occupied a racial category that did not exist in the American system. The first known use in print appears in an 1840 court case. The word was already old by then. The debate over the word's origin mirrors the debate over the people's origin. Neither has been conclusively settled. In a country built on racial classification, the Melungeon did not fit any box. Being classified as non-white meant losing the right to vote, own land, testify in court, and attend school. Melungeon families fought legal battles for generations to be classified as white. Their survival depended on it. Those who failed lost everything. Children excluded from schools, property seized, families pushed deeper into the mountains. Mountain springs provided water, forest provided game and timber. The land sustained them when society would not. Property records show Melungeon families losing land after racial reclassification. Farms held for generations seized by legal challenge. Being reclassified from white to colored meant your property rights could be challenged. And in many cases, they concentrated in Newman's Ridge and the surrounding hollows of Hancock County, Tennessee, remote, inaccessible, and ignored. Isolation was protection. If the government could not reach you, it could not classify you. The combination of features was genuinely unusual. Dark skin with light eyes, European bone structure with non-European coloring. Some applications were denied. Families that had been white for decades were reclassified overnight. For generations, the Melungeon intermarried within their community. They developed distinct physical features that further confused outsiders. Newman's Ridge was almost inaccessible. No paved roads until the 1930s. That isolation preserved both the community and its mystery. Outsiders rarely came, and when they did, they left with more questions than answers. Observers described them as dark-complexioned with European features. Some had blue or green eyes with olive or brown skin. And the theories multiplied. each one more exotic than the last. Every description was filtered through the observer's racial framework. What they saw depended on what they expected. The lost colony theory was the most romantic. Raleigh's colonists vanished in 1590. Could they have reached the mountains? Ethnographers measured skulls, catalogued skin tones, and recorded hair texture. They treated the Melungeon like specimens. The measurements proved nothing, but they reinforced the idea that the Melungeon were something to be classified rather than understood. 300 miles of wilderness separated Roanoke from Newman's Ridge, and no archaeological evidence connected them. The autosomal comparison was definitive. Melungeon DNA shared nothing distinctive with Portuguese populations. The few photographs that survive show faces that genuinely defy simple classification. And that was the problem. The Portuguese theory was the most popular. It claimed the Melungeon descended from Portuguese explorers who settled the Appalachians before the English arrived. Some families even claimed Portuguese ancestry on census records. It was safer than the alternatives. The Turkish theory claimed descent from Ottoman sailors or settlers. The Phoenician theory reached back 3,000 years. The Portuguese theory gained momentum in the 1960s. Books were written, documentaries produced. The romantic narrative sold. Each theory competed for attention. Each one avoided the simplest explanation. Some authors linked them to the lost colony of Roanoke. Others suggested they were descendants of Sir Francis Drake's abandoned Turkish prisoners. Each theory had one thing in common. Each gave the Melungeon an ancestry that avoided the consequences of African descent. The theories were not about history. They were about survival in a system that punished blackness. The timing of admixture was estimated at roughly 10 to 15 generations ago, consistent with the 1700s. R1b, the most common European male lineage. E1b1a, the most common West African male lineage, both present in the same mountain community. Under Jim Crow, being classified as non-white meant separate schools, separate facilities, and restricted employment. The Melungeon lived in this system for over a century. Melungeon children were excluded from white schools well into the 20th century. Some walked hours to reach colored schools. Education was a weapon. Denying it kept the community isolated and dependent. Family oral traditions adapted. Stories were shaped to protect. Portuguese ancestry was safe. African ancestry was dangerous. The colonial frontier was a contact zone. Indentured servants, free Africans, and Native Americans all shared the same spaces. Indentured servants and free blacks had more in common with each other than with the planter class. They lived together, and they had children together. And for 200 years, the question of who the Melungeon really were remained officially unanswered. In 2012, geneticist Roberta Estes and a research team published the first comprehensive DNA study of core Melungeon families. The family trees show the mixing happened in the earliest generations. By 1800, the triracial signature was already fixed. They tested both Y-chromosome and mitochondrial DNA from descendants of the original Melungeon families documented in Hancock County. The study recruited volunteers from documented core Melungeon families. Participants had to trace ancestry to Hancock County before 1850. Genealogical verification was critical. The researchers needed confirmed Melungeon lineage, not just self-identification. The results ended 2 centuries of speculation in a single dataset. The Y-chromosome results showed predominantly European and sub-Saharan African paternal lineages. No Turkish, no Phoenician, no Portuguese, specific markers. Mitochondrial DNA told a parallel story. European, African, and Native American maternal lineages all present. Virginia's Racial Integrity Act of 1924 targeted racial ambiguity. The Melungeon were in its crosshairs. Walter Plecker, Virginia's Registrar of Vital Statistics, personally targeted mixed-race communities. He wrote letters to county clerks demanding reclassification. Under the act, Any person with any non-white ancestry was legally non-white. No exceptions, no appeals. The Melungeon were a triracial population, European, African, and Native American ancestry, mixed together in colonial America. Admixture analysis breaks each individual genome into ancestral components. The Melungeon showed 3 distinct sources. No 2 individuals had the same proportions. The mixture was real, but varied from family to family. Not Portuguese, not Turkish, not Phoenician, American. Formed right here on this continent. Within a single family, appearances varied enormously. Some members appeared European, others appeared African. Same parents, same genes. The European component was British Isles. The African matched West Africa. The Native American matched Southeastern tribes. Consumer DNA testing in the 2010s brought another wave of revelations. Thousands of people with Melungeon surnames tested independently. The results matched the academic study. European majority, African component, Native American contribution, consistent across hundreds of tests. The picture was clear. In the colonial period, likely the 1700s, European settlers, free or enslaved Africans, and Native Americans formed a mixed community in the Appalachian frontier. The consumer tests added geographic precision. The European component was concentrated in the British Isles, not Iberia, ending the Portuguese theory permanently. The Portuguese theory required Iberian-specific haplogroups. None were found. The Turkish theory required Near Eastern markers. None appeared. 2 centuries of the most popular theories eliminated in a single analysis. On the frontier, racial categories were less rigid. Intermarriage happened far from colonial authorities. On the frontier, survival mattered more than racial classification. The Melungeon were the result. But as the frontier closed and the plantation system expanded, the racial categories hardened and mixed. Race people faced a terrible choice. But here is the twist. The DNA did not just answer the question. It revealed why the question existed. The Melungeon mystery was not a natural mystery. It was manufactured. The confusion was the point. These mountains kept a secret for 200 years, not because the truth was hidden, because no one wanted to see it. The names on the stones are the same names in the DNA databases. Collins, Gibson, Mullins. The continuity is unbroken. Census records show the same families reclassified from decade to decade. White in one census, mulatto in the next, free-colored in the one after that. Racial indeterminacy, the academic term for what the Melungeon lived. A space the system refused to name. Census takers had 4 categories: white, black, mulatto, Indian. The Melungeon fit none and all simultaneously. When sympathetic officials counted, Melungeon families were white. When hostile officials counted, they were colored. Newman's Ridge is no longer isolated. Paved roads and internet have connected the community to the wider world. The mystery that once defined them has been replaced by evidence, and the evidence is more interesting than any myth. The classifications depended on who the census taker was, what the family claimed, and what the local power structure wanted. Virginia's racial integrity laws were among the strictest in America. The one-drop rule meant that any African ancestry, no matter how distant, classified a person as black. The pattern repeated across every community studied. The frontier did the same thing everywhere it existed. The conversation has shifted from who the Melungeon were to what their existence reveals about American racial categories. The Melungeon did not create the mystery. The racial system created it for them. Claiming Portuguese ancestry was not delusion. It was a survival strategy inside a system that punished blackness. And the strategy worked. Enough ambiguity kept many Melungeon families classified as white, or at least out of the worst legal categories. A Melungeon heritage movement emerged in the 1990s. Descendants began openly researching their ancestry. For many, the DNA results were not a surprise. They confirmed what family whispers had always suggested. The DNA results confirmed what many Melungeon families had quietly known for generations, but could never safely say. They were mixed, and their mixture was not ancient or exotic. It was colonial American. The DNA did not diminish the Melungeon story. It made it more powerful and more honest. Hancock County now embraces the heritage it once tried to hide. Tourism brings revenue. History brings recognition. The Heritage Museum tells the story with evidence instead of myth. DNA results posted alongside census records and family photographs. The family trees showed the mixing happened early. By the third generation, every family carried all three ancestries. The Vardy community maintained its own church and school, a parallel society built because the mainstream rejected them. The Melungeon are not alone. Across the American South, similar triracial, isolate communities exist. The Lumbee of North Carolina, the Brass Ankles of South Carolina, the Red Bones of Louisiana, each one a mixed community with a contested origin story. DNA studies show the same pattern everywhere. European, African, and Native American ancestry formed in colonial America. The frontier created these communities. Jim Crow preserved them. DNA finally explained them. The Melungeon have the highest European proportion among the documented triracial isolates. But the structure is the same everywhere. Each community has its own origin mythology, each one developed in the same historical conditions. The Lumbee of North Carolina are the largest of these communities, over 50,000 members. Their federal recognition battle continues. American racial categories were never biological. They were legal constructions designed to distribute power and property. The Melungeon existed in the gap between those categories, and the gap was uncomfortable for everyone who maintained the system. You cannot classify what you refuse to see clearly. The Melungeon were hidden in plain sight. Today, Melungeon identity is being reclaimed. Heritage organizations hold annual gatherings. Genealogical research connects families to their documented roots. The Melungeon are now a case study in population genetics courses, an example of how social categories create genetic isolation. When a community marries only within itself, genetic distinctiveness increases each generation. Isolation shaped their genome. The DNA did not erase Melungeon identity. It grounded it in evidence rather than myth. If this was useful, subscribe. We cover the DNA evidence behind every contested identity. The Melungeon survived 2 centuries of erasure. They were classified, reclassified, excluded, and mythologized, and in the end, a swab of saliva answered a question that 200 years of speculation could not. For generations, the same family, the mystery was never who they were. It was who the country allowed them to be. The archive grows with every new participant. Every test adds resolution to the ancestral picture. Because the Melungeon were never a mystery, they were Americans, and America was never as simple as the categories pretended. The mountains kept their story safe. The DNA finally told it.